Felicitations, malefactors, and welcome back to Random Pick. It's been a long time since our last episode, but we're back with episode 13. This episode, we are talking with soon-to-be Dr. Andrew Olin. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
With this being our 13th episode, and with Halloween being right around the corner, I find it very fitting that our topic of discussion will be on Arkham Horror. Olin, would you start us off by explaining what Arkham Horror is for those at home who may be unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, I didn't even think it was Halloween. It's perfect. Arkham Horror is, well, I guess you could argue that Arkham Horror is sort of a franchise, but mainly I would say its biggest game is Arkham Horror, the card game. And it plays actually pretty similar to a board game despite being called a card game. Essentially, you play as just normal human beings, but they're investigating some strange occurrences that have happened. Usually ends up involving monsters or just bad people, and often culminates into a confrontation with a big eldritch horror, which you have to survive and save the world at the same time.
Yes, it is also quite difficult at times, but what draws you to this game in particular?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say the draw for Arkham Horror, the card game, is twofold. First off, you can play scenarios standalone, but one of the biggest draws is the campaign setting. It's a co-op game where you are up to 4 people can play as investigators throughout a campaign, and the campaign first off has very great narrative pieces. I think the writing's done very well. Story isn't like Oscar worthy, but it's enough that you can definitely get engaged in it and just invest yourself in it. And the art design of the different cards that you use kind of as little terrain pieces that you move around on, which is why it kind of acts like a board. The art is done very well. But also mechanically, the campaign, I think, is done well because if you, I guess, quote unquote, fail, and like you said, very easy to fail, you can prepare as much as possible and be an expert at the game and just be completely and helplessly blindsided by the brutal luck that Arkham Horror can throw your way. And if that happens, the scenario doesn't kind of slap you in the face and make you do it again. It sort of plays as part of the narrative where you lost the scenario, so X happened, but then because of that, it has ramifications on future scenarios in the campaign. And although winning is preferable, it doesn't feel like it halts you. It kind of feels like it's natural part of the progression. But I'd say that's the first big draw to the card game. Secondly is the deck. You don't have to get into the deck building. Sorry, excuse me. I think the board game company Fantasy Flight Games makes a starter deck for each of the different investigators, of which there are a lot. There's over 50 at least.
Yes.
But if you really want to, you can spend like hours getting used to like what all the different cards can do, the specialties of different classes, and like the unique attributes that different investigators in different classes can have. And you can really just dig your teeth into the deck building. I think a lot of the draw has to do similarly to maybe some PvP card game deck builders. But I guess what you would be preparing for is a little different. You always want to, build your deck to do something. If you were doing Magic, you would want to build your deck to ultimately be able to stop your opponent while having X, Y, and Z contingency in case they, also have a good deck that wants to stop you. But since Arkham Horror is more of a co-op sort of genre and also has different classes, you can kind of build your investigator to do different things. If you want to focus on fighting, you want to focus on evasion, or maybe you want to focus on evasion but have a little bit of investigating and clue gathering side to it. It's really easy to just sink your teeth into the vast card array that you have, combined with, again, all the little unique aspects that each investigator has. It's one of the biggest draws to the game for me.
Yes, I would agree. I've had fun just building decks or like randomly selecting an investigator to try to figure out, okay, how can we make these investigators work together in a team? For example, we've had well, I guess some of the main like goals generally in a session or a campaign is you have like clue finder, you want to find clues, you want to have somebody that can be able to defend against or defeat the monsters, and then I guess you know, have some amount of healing or like other things, but generally
Yeah.
trying to find a balance between those things between your players is ultimately kind of the goal when you're playing with other people.
Yeah, for sure. And the nice thing is, you can obviously hard specialize. If you had a seeker, they're gonna probably you can gear them towards exclusively clue finding and guardian exclusively towards monster fighting. But there's also like mystics and rogues and survivors, and they have this weird mix of kind of whatever you want to do with the investigator. Like you said, I mean, the game's pretty tough, so it's good to have a general idea of roles to be filled. You don't want to have four seekers on your team just clue finding, but there is also a lot of give and flexibility with how you can build your investigator without feeling like you're shunted into one particular role in the team.
True, like you could have, I suppose you could, if you wanted to, try to shoehorn in like combat stuff into like a seeker deck, but take something like a mystic, which has pretty good offensive capabilities and is pretty good at clue finding, so you can, you know, make a balance, or have a character that's good at like two things and things like that, if
Yeah.
which is
Or you could make the symphony of jank. Just make it work.
yes, my greatest creation. But yes, so what obviously the game is taken from, at least the lore is taken from the Lovecraft mythos. So
Mhm.
is there something in particular about that lore that just kind of fascinates you or keeps you drawn into the game?
Frankly, I would say one of the things I've enjoyed the most about Arkham is that I feel like it more than anything has introduced me to the Lovecraft universe. And what I've found that I like about Lovecraft is that it's like different multiverses or universes in general that we see nowadays kind of have like particular, I guess, rules or uh, I guess a lot more world building and lore in them. And while world building and lore is awesome, it kind of it shapes the world to be a very specific way. And I feel like Lovecraft, even though, I guess you could say like tentacles are an ongoing theme, you can kind of do whatever you want with Lovecraft. And I've found that to be just great because Lovecraft was more or less just embracing the idea of cosmic horror without having to instill very particular themes to support that. And I mean, that said, Fantasy Flight Games has actually kind of tried to make that their own by they sort of have their own mythos going where the investigators you play as are characters that could recur in different board games. I think they released maybe some novellas. I haven't really looked at them, but they do seem to try and add a little more depth to the characters as characters, not just one-off faceless homunculi that you inhabit. But in general, I think like because you and I have played like a game of Call of Cthulhu and something else that we've been considering that's also in the Lovecraft universe, but you can kind of take it whatever direction you like. And I enjoy that about Lovecraft. I guess some could argue that it's not in essence like its own thing if it's so open ended. But I think that Lovecraft does a pretty good job introducing sort of themes or instilling particular kinds of horror and fear without being too particular on how he. That said, I would like to read a little more Lovecraft works in the future. I have not read that many. I think I've read Dunwich Horror, Mountains of Madness, not nameless. It's something city. It might be the nameless city, and I think Curse of Yig, but I don't know if that was exclusively. But yeah,
Yeah, I would to piggyback off of that, the I would say in a lot of Lovecraft stuff, a general theme is the fear of the unknown, which I think can apply to a lot of different situations, which is why it works so well, especially
hmm
since generally the stories, or at least like the campaigns even at the beginning, start out as something like mundane, like, oh, we're investigating like a murder, or we're all at the theater trying to watch a
yeah,
play,
yeah,
and then something crazy happens and plunges you all into this like crazy adventure of like trying to survive. Like it could be anything from like werewolves to aliens to like sea monsters to just some dude in a creepy mask. Like
yeah.
it's all kinds of stuff. Um, but with that, I think the game does a good job of that. You have that since there's a bit of the RNG where you pull out like tokens from the bag and stuff to like see if you
There's a lot
succeed.
of the art.
Yeah,
Sorry. What?
to see if you succeed or fail, and that like to a certain degree that there's a little bit of like fear of the unknown in that bag of you never know if you're just going to pull an auto fail or like maybe you'll get an auto success. So there's just a lot of stuff up in the air.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of RNG.
Mhm. But with that, it creates a lot of like high tension scenarios. So, do you have a specific, either a specific moment or encounter, or maybe just a campaign as a whole that you remember as being like, oh, this is a really like high tension, high stakes moment?
Ooh, there's gotta be at least one. Let's see. See, it's been like 2 or 3 months since I've even played Arkham. I'm trying to remember. I feel like we've had multiple. So the first thing that comes to mind when you say that though is probably Forgotten Age, where I was playing with Leo Anderson is this big bulk, but like time weathered expedition leader, and he was definitely the fighter. He was the monster fighter. And then there is Wendy Adams, who I guess canonically in the universe is a street urchin. So that happens. She's also on the team, I suppose. But she's very good at investigating and also like evading monsters. And it's funny because you, me, and Tim played this campaign too, and I realized that I had resolved the scenario incorrectly, like to my own detriment the first time I had played it.
No.
But yeah, there was this scenario where you've been taken out of your own bodies and put into like not just put into these alien bodies in this crazy alien world, but also you are, I guess, as a side effect of being in this body, you are slowly losing your sense of self and memory. So it's kind of like a race against time. And we were so close to making it out and getting back to our own bodies, but I think Wendy suffers. It was one of the treacheries that you pull, and treacheries are just the bad event that can happen essentially. It ended up like barely killing, and like right before Leo made it out. And so I remember being devastated because when that ended, I thought I had read the scenario and I played it as if an investigator is defeated in this scenario, they're just out for the rest of the campaign.
Right.
And yeah, so it was rough, but I had gotten attached to the two characters, and although it was sad to see Wendy was lost, I was glad that Leo made it because I was more attached to Leo.
Yes, that happens quite a bit because there was, I think it was either the first or second session of Carcosa that we played, which was a campaign. Um, Tim's character died like within the first two sessions, I think, right?
Oh yeah, that was the same campaign. I think that was Forgotten
Oh,
Age.
was it? Okay.
He was playing Silas Marsh, right?
Yep. And
And man,
yeah.
he got he got just pile driven by the scenario. I think he pulled like 3 auto fails. And so with the chaos bag, there's always a modifier to see how much it modifies your skill, and you want higher modifiers so that you can pass the test, and if you get lower ones you might fail it.
Mm-hmm.
But oh wait, give me a second. Yeah, Tim kept pulling auto fails, and auto fail means you automatically fail the test, and he kept pulling them. It was so sad.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then yeah, it had something to do with vengeance. That's right, I remember that. It was because, I guess, yeah, story wise it was perfect. It was because he killed a tiny viper in the first scenario, that in the second one, when he died, he lost his character. It was perfect.
Yes, it was almost like karmic justice, because he killed
Yeah.
this snake just because we didn't really know what we were getting into, but he killed it and added like a stack of vengeance, which later in the campaign, vengeance became a lot more harmful if we had multiple
Yeah.
stacks of it. But he just kind of, yeah, because he did that one thing, it ended up killing his character because he took more damage or something.
And I think that's one thing I love about the game, is that those moments don't happen because they're script. Like, it was not that he was like, it doesn't ask you if you killed this tiny little innocuous viper. It's just that it's so because of the way that the mechanic worked with vengeance. It just so happened that if he had spared that tiny viper, he would have still, his character would not have been permanently killed.
Correct.
It's just perfect.
Yes, but I'm sure there are tons of moments that if we took the time we could probably think of. But do you have a specific either character or deck that has been like your favorite? Or
I guess deck. Character wise, investigator wise, Dexter Drake is second, but number one is probably Leo. It was. I'm a sucker for stories, so even if the campaign I was playing didn't write it this way, in my mind, I had it so that, because in the story you have like very little funding, and Leo is canonically an expedition leader, and the campaign thematically is basically you're going on an expedition with little funding, so it was perfect to pick him. But essentially, I had written it so that I didn't write anything, but I had kind of made up of my mind that he recruited Wendy Adams and like offered her like a position pretty much, because like she was a street urchin, so she just kind of went with it and said, "Yeah, I like, if you'll offer me a place to like food and water, like I'll go." And like over time, they develop this bond as they go through multiple scenarios, and they were both great decks too. So I didn't want to lose either of them.
mm-hmm.
But canonically, Leo is also this like very worn kind of explorer, where he's already had to step over like bodies of his friends, trying to not just do expeditions, but he's had a lot of experience with like the mythos, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So when we ended up losing Wendy, it just felt like perfect for the story I was spinning in my mind. That like it would, of course, it would be Leo that survived, and he was not happy about it, but it was towards the end of the campaign, so it had to be done.
Yeah. Yep. I would say out of the decks that I have made, I haven't made nearly as many as you have. But I don't know. I really, really liked my Lola Hayes deck.
Really?
I really enjoyed that. I don't think it's my favorite. I think my favorite deck was the character I played for Carcosa. I forget her name.
I'm trying to.
She's like, when she moves to a location, she can investigate for free.
Ursula Downs.
Ursula
Yes, I
Downs.
remember that.
Yes. Yes. So
Yeah, she's a very powerful investigator.
yeah,
Yeah, as far as decks, I guess Leo would also be my favorite deck, though, because the way Leo works is that it's ironic that they would write him as like someone who hates having to like sacrifice people, but ends up inevitably having to, because his entire deck building is around just spitting out as many allies as you can, and just having them act as like, they have different powers, of course, and abilities, but they also just act as like meat shields.
Mm-hmm.
So you and Tim know that I made this doggy deck where Leo, if you build it properly, he can have like, what is it? Like 6 dogs out at once, and they each have like two health and 2 sanity, or 3 health, 3 sanity, which is a lot. He just runs around with 6 dogs in tow. It's so funny. He's so tanky. That's what I love about him. He can push through whatever the Mythos throws at him. It's just so much fun.
Yes, it's great. But yes, I think for me, the Ursula Downs deck was probably the best deck, like mechanically, that I actually made. Probably because I had the most experience playing when we ran that. Um, but
Fair.
I really liked building the Lola Hayes deck just because it was unique, and
Yeah.
normally it doesn't really. It probably wasn't it wasn't really geared towards a specific this is my specific job. I was trying to make like a jack of all trades sort of a deck, and it didn't quite work, but I just liked how, cuz for those that don't know, basically the Lola Hayes is like a unique investigator where she doesn't restrict herself to one or two like specific classes. Like she could use like cards from every class, but only up to like a certain level, and then you on your turn, like your special, I guess, investigator power or ability, lets you switch between different roles. And I just found that rather interesting. I was basically trying to make a Swiss Army knife type character.
And I think that's what she was meant to be, but I mean, the problem is you can have level 0 to 5 cards. Level 5 cards are usually very good, but also very expensive with experience to spend to put it in your deck. And Lola, I mean, first off, her card ceiling is so low because she can only go up to level 3 cards, and that can have a much bigger impact than you would think, and like how powerful your deck can be. But then secondly, like you said, her ability to switch between roles, it's cool, but it's also like it's very limiting in a way, because even though you can add cards from all the different classes into your deck, you can only actually play or even use cards that are already out that are pertaining to the particular role that you've switched to using your ability. So it ends up, I feel like she ends up being too limited. And I really don't think it was your fault, Sam. I
Right.
just personally, I think Lola just needs help. I enjoy the idea that they were going for, and I think the execution could have been better.
Correct. I feel a similar way, but maybe this is probably just how I built my Patrice Hathaway deck, which was the Symphony of Jank deck. But
I thought your Patrice deck was a monster.
yeah, it was actually great. I thought that deck was so fun, just the
Just
silliness.
discard your entire hand and test to like +10 for the test.
Yeah. And then just yeah, it was interesting because we had a little interaction where like we weren't entirely sure how two cards work together. So I think you went on the Discord
Oh
for
yeah.
like the designer or like the actual game Discord or whatever, and asked like someone a question of like how does this work, and they were like I don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
why would someone do this.
I think they did say that. Yeah, I remember. I guess. I mean, I guess it's not technically official, but it might as well be. Like the community that made it puts in so much time, and there's a lot of people that are involved in the deciding or in interpreting rules. Because Arkham Horror, with the amount of deck building you have, is a very crunchy game. It's one of the things I love about it. But yeah, it was a very specific interaction. You had to use this card to start with this much XP, so you could buy these two very specific cards, so you could add this one that allows you to get this one.
Yeah.
And that card interacts with her ability.
Yes, because the way her ability works is if anyone's ever played the game Dominion, it's kind of like that, where at the end of your turn, you discard your hand and you draw 5 new cards. However, there was another card that you had to, as Olin was explaining, do this really convoluted chain of buying cards to get in your deck for her. that would allow you to, instead of discarding, I think it was at the end of your turn, you could
Yeah, and
you could discard a card to draw 2 cards or something like that.
yeah, essentially her innate ability modifies her normal upkeep phase, where the normal upkeep would be you draw a card. Her ability says instead of doing that, discard and draw 5, like you mentioned in like similar to Dominion. But then the card that you bought through that convoluted process also modifies the same thing, so it has the exact same text of instead of.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were trying to decide, like, do you get to choose which one happens every turn, or do you have to like commit to it, or does one of them override the
Or
other?
do both happen? And I think it ended up being that I got to choose, which worked out perfectly, so I could basically ignore my forced ability of discarding my whole hand, which became really relevant at certain points where it's like, okay, I need this for next turn, so I don't have to worry about discarding it because I have this other card that would just let me, I think it was just discard 1 card, draw 2 cards instead of the normal upkeep or
Mhm.
something.
Yeah. In essence, you got to turn what would have been a forced ability into like just a switch.
Yeah,
Be like, do I want this?
which I thought was pretty cool because it made what could potentially be a downside of playing the character into something that was trivial.
Yeah. I mean, when you stump the people on the Discord, like, oh, how did you even do that? Why would you even?
Yeah.
Oh man.
It's a great stuff, but well, I guess before we end our little talk here, would you have any tips for people who might be interested in the game, who would be playing for the first time or just getting into it?
I think it depends on what direction you're coming at it from. I think because you could come at it from like a Magic the Gathering PvP sort of aspect, or you could come at it from, hey, I enjoyed, because there's other board games along the same vein in the same quote unquote universe made by the same company, like Eldritch Horror and Arkham Horror. And so if you're coming at it from that perspective and you're not as used to the deck building yet, I would say that definitely start with the starter decks, because I know it's different for every investigator, but number one, it kind of familiarizes you with the card pool a bit. But then number two, it also just familiarizes you with the rules to deck building and how that can influence how you build a deck. Like no more than 2 copies of one named card in a deck, for example. But if you came at it from Magic the Gathering, I think you want to build a deck that is part of a team. You can go true solo in this game. And there are some investigators that work that way, but definitely not all of them. I would say all investigators are great, but only some of them work true solo because, in my humble opinion, the game is better when you play with more than one investigator. So, I mean, I guess if you're coming from Magic the Gathering and you want to build a self-sufficient deck, then there's probably a list of like a short list of good self-sufficient investigators like Roland Banks or something that you could try and build your own self-sufficient deck with to just go on your own. But I think it's more fun even to learn to build a deck towards a specific role. Say like this is something I want to accomplish, and they have a little flavor of this here and there, but it is ultimately one cog in a machine of investigators approaching a particular scenario.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for coming on the show, Olin. Hope to potentially have you on again in the future. I hope.
Oh yeah, anytime. I'd love to.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for those of you listening at home. If you liked the podcast, please like and subscribe, and then we will hopefully have another episode out next month. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for listening to Random Pick.